is for you in particular, Israel, maybe for you, because I don't think I've seen you before, but welcome. And so the whole idea was at the height of lockdown, we had a batch, Falguni, who's here managing the room and helping us moderate the space, was one of that batch. And we call them the gradually graduating batch right now, because we still have them in a space of how do we take you to completion. But we didn't know what we were going to do. I started to reach out to heads of schools across the planet, who I just happened to know. And the conversation we realized in the conversation that a lot of us were saying the same things, thinking about the same things, searching for the same things. How do you teach in the absence of presence? What do you do in a time of such massive disruption? What does it mean? What is the responsibility of ours to our teachers or to our students? And that's where the idea of Unrehearsed Futures was born. At the same time, Amy came in to run an international, so we decided we could have international instructors come and teach people in India. And so Amy came and taught the batch under disruption, and then she ran another workshop for us. And we got talking, and by that time I'd launched Unrehearsed Futures. And we realized that this is a conversation that people are gravitating towards because everyone feels the need for it. And it really has helped us as a school. When we decided to launch our digital course in October, it gave us a lot of reference points from which to think about how to mindfully move into the future, which is what we've done. But in the meantime, Unrehearsed Futures has become something beautiful because, I mean, Amy's subtitle curatorial for the 8 sections that she did, which is responsibility, which I think is amazing. What is our response? What is our responsibility? Has also shown us that we're working towards a future. The future is unrehearsed, whether there's a pandemic or not. The rate of change, the rate of disruptions, the rate of all the different things. And what this pandemic has done is it's just heightened the moment where certain questions that we took for granted, this is the way it's always been, this is how we have always taught, all of that got thrown up. And what that has done for us is, well, since every question is thrown up, let's start investigating through all those questions in a meaningful way, in a mindful way. It's really good to see all of you here. It's really good to see so many regular faces back. Hi, Carol. Good to see you again. But if you're coming in for the first time, please keep joining these conversations. The curatorial flavor of them will change again in January. Amy and I are meeting on Sunday to decide how that's going to happen. But we are just always in conversation and a continuing ongoing conversation that is supposed to just make us all more prepped for how we professionally and personally embark into theater and theater training in the future. So I'll leave it with that. It's so good to see all of you here. More people will join. Amy will talk us through the format, etc. And without further ado, Amy, who has come on as a great collaborator and a co-conspirator in this, thank you. Thank you for bringing these amazing people in. And I'm just going to sit back and enjoy being a participant.
Thank you, Jehan. And to the team at DSM who are behind this. And thank you very much to you all for coming, and to my guests today, Judy Beauvais and Kamili Okweni Feelings. We have conspired to put together a little discussion for you around the title, An Actor Prepares For. And the interest we had was in looking really at the questions that had been coming up already in this discussion over the months. What will theater be like? What are we training actors for? If most of the people who come to this discussion are theater pedagogues, the interest is, what is theater going to look like? And so I thought I would introduce to you my two wonderful colleagues, Judy and Kamili, who are, Judy is primarily a director, and if I'm not mistaken, I'm going to introduce you and then you can speak a bit about yourselves as well. And Kamili, primarily a playwright, a writer and a playwright, because the two of them are working very audaciously at the edges of what is considered to be the canon, and with very new ways of looking at theater. And so I thought this would be an interesting discussion for us to have together about what the growth edge might be in our beloved field of theater and performance. So I'll do a little introduction for both of Julie and Kamili, and then I'll ask them to add anything they want to. Julie's art is driven by her interest in embodied experience and elevation. Her diverse works in theater, opera, and installation have been performed and exhibited in many countries. Not limited to the confines of theater, her practice engages the broader public sphere through hybrids of opera and monumental installation art in public space. After graduating from the École Jacques Lecoq in Paris in 2000, Beauvais first explored different forms of epic theater in diverse political contexts. She directed collaborations with Brazilian, Mongolian, and Nicaraguan companies, which toured Europe, Asia, and Latin America. Julie, do you want to unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about your more recent portfolio of work?
Sure. Yeah, this was a long time ago. It was 20 years ago, this previous story I had with theater. And now I really left theater to work really more with architects, with philosophers, with researchers from many different fields, scientific researchers, but also artists. And we've engaged in a research of working mostly with more than with humans. And we've been developing that for 10 years now, traveling and developing long-term processes with different communities around the world, but putting them together with the major institutions and festivals as well. So the idea is to have an approach tuned to multi-species becoming with, combining sometimes more and more deep listening practices, sound art, new music. We work a lot with new composers, architects, conscious movement, scientific research, and so on. So it's a joyous time for us now, because we are meeting the needs of our partners and the communities around us. We work a lot with indigenous people and with trans-territorial cooperations. So now, since the start of this pandemic, it has been a lot of work for us, and we are thrilled to go on with these projects.
Great. And at some point, I'll definitely ask you to speak more about Witness and about the Sonic Lab as well. Great. So, and Kamili, want to introduce Kamili. Okweni Feelings has worked in Philadelphia with Pig Iron Theater Company, Pulley and Buttonhole Theater, Beacon Theater, the Drama Group, Allen's Lane Theater, and Stagecrafters. He was a company member at Trust Us Theater in South Carolina for several years, and he's worked with Trinity Repertory Theater and the Providence Black Repertory Company, and toured with Strange Attractor Theater in Rhode Island and throughout the southeast of Alaska. Kamili is a Brown University alumni, having studied under playwrights Paula Fogel and the late Aisha Rahman in the famous playwriting program. He spent his whole life waiting for the American version of Apocalypse to occur, and while he's delighted that it has shown up in his lifetime, and while he has prepped modestly for the changes to come, he still believes it could have been so much more than what he imagined in his mind's eye. Kamili, I'm sorry that the American Apocalypse has disappointed you so far, but it might get better. Let me just, Kamili, did you want to add anything to what I just read out in terms of what your interests are and where it intersects with this topic?
Sure. I guess I put that in kind of tongue in cheekly because I really kind of find humor is the easiest way to access the imagination, and the more audacious the humor I found just from kind of having a kind of informal study of stand-up comedians in America here, I always find like it's just the easiest door to go through a lot of times, and so yeah, I've been really kind of interested in how theater is this tool for being able to access the imagination, how it gets fairly used fairly mundanely sometimes, and just what the idea of the access to the arts means in general, and not just necessarily speaking about theater in some sort of kind of absolute terms, but just more talking about how it relates to just us being able to try to inspire one another, right, and inspire populations of people in some ways too. So yeah, I guess that's been my more that's been my interest since kind of passing through theater and the arts in general all my life. hmm Anyway, that's all I have to say.
So, well, let me just ask you, Kamili, because you've just been talking about it. What do you think your theater is right now? Are you still writing plays? I mean, what do you consider the role of a playwright? What is theater for you at the moment?
It's very interesting when I got a chance to be around kind of other excuse me, say, be around other playwrights in the framework and the hierarchy that we were in. They were elite people. And so it was interesting that they talked in a certain shorthand, which I found really instructive for me, because there's all the architecture of trying to create a play, and then there's how much you know about human beings, how much are you frightened of stories that scare you. And for me at the time, I think I was just about to turn 30. I don't even think I was 30 yet. So I think those were still very frightening things for me. It's not like I had a completely kind of separate life, but I was still not ready to access the some darker parts of my life, I guess, that I had experienced early on. You go through traumas as kids, and then you don't put it together into your 20s or 30s if you're lucky, and you certainly don't start working on them until your 40s. And I'm not even 50 yet, so I'm still kind of working out how those relate to stories that I'm still trying to articulate. But in short answer to your question, I'm not really writing plays anymore. I'm working on radio dramas, and I think that's probably an easier way to access the brain. Um, yeah, and for some reason, I think I just got really. We get a saturation of images, and we've had it for years now in this country. So at some point, I wonder whether the brain just turns off when you're watching things. I certainly think I'm a big pop culture guy, so I love pop culture, but I think CGI, that's computer generated imagery, has created so many things on the front and the screen without giving you any level of scale or being able to understand that this is a heavy thing that's coming towards you or anything like that. So people's eyes just start going dumb, right? There's just things happening in front of you that you don't have any relationship to. So I'm really interested in that. Maybe not necessarily as a formal study, but just when do you get people's attention with that stuff, and why would you need it if some of the things that you're doing soundtrack wise are more interesting for their minds? So anyway, hope that makes any sense.
A theater of sound, so that's something that you and Judy have in common.
Yeah.
Judy, I think it might be hard for people to imagine some of your work. Do you want to describe Witness, the Deep Listening Project, which is also very attuned to the sense of hearing?
Sure. So how to start? There is this festival in Zurich, Sonic Matter Festival, and we are three co-directors and co-curators of that festival, taking care of different aspects of it. Sonic Matter is definitely rooted in Zurich, but reaching worldwide. And I told my two colleagues, Katharina Rosenberger and Lisa Nolte, take care of the part in Zurich, take care of that, and let me take care of the rest. And that would mean taking care of a 365 stream that would include and make more visible and more audible researchers around the world who are already, as a group, researching with local communities, with local inhabitants, with scientists and artists. And they already exist and they're already working. But my work as a curator would be to really make them even more visible and to make them in contact and to strengthen their research by exchanging more and more with other groups of researchers. So that's what is going on now. We have been putting a common protocol for all these groups in North America, South America, South, Middle Africa, the Arabic region, Russia, China. We've been putting together, and India, of course, we've been putting together a lot of common ground, because our researchers are similar but very unique, site-specific. And our common ground for The Witness is the score by Pauline Oliveros, The Witness. Pauline Oliveros is a pioneer in electronic music. In the 60s, she developed deep listening, and she developed this very playful and deep way to get attuned with the world, inner world and the outside world. And this attunement is probably what I think, or what I want to develop now with these beautiful resources and support of this Swiss festival, is how can we, in these troubled times, discover and listen to the world's changing messages and pass them along to others in order to facilitate the dialogue between the variety of sentient beings. So it means really the opposite of being in a black box amongst human beings and and discussing human beings, very anthropocentric themes, and trying to really not hear any other sound that could be disturbing our perfect transposition and style. So the idea is the exact opposite of this, and to be very porous and to include as much as possible more than humans, so that we are actually really co-creating together. Most of it is listening, because of course, if we got to, now we are working a lot in the, for example, burned forests on the East Coast, on the West Coast of the United States. And of course, not about going there with the Philharmonic Orchestra and playing for the burned forest. It's not about doing anything, actually. It's about being there and being with a heightened level of consciousness, presence, and listening. And that's why I love working with scientists and with musicians. I don't like being with musicians or working with musicians on these pieces, because I directed operas and that was beautiful. They know how to play music. But I'm more interested now in how do they know, maybe in another way, how to listen. And so I'm working with musicians for their listening skills, not so much for their ability to produce beautiful sounds and music. And so the idea, to wrap it, is to put together all these teams so they can exchange, co-develop, interact, and meet in monthly meetings throughout the year. We will see. There is plan A, we don't travel at all. Plan B, the head researchers of each team meet monthly. We have this multimedia platform that we are thinking about now. So how, in a way, can we also invent, escape these little Hollywood squares we are all in now, and have a much more dynamic way of being your own curator of this page you open, and picking different medias and different formats that you can really discover, not in a line, not in lists, but really explore the different researchers from the different simultaneous team working in the field. And that will happen over 3 years, and putting together different cultures every year. And ideally, we would, in each location, engage in a science art activist worlding, committed to partial healing, modest rehabilitation, and still maybe possible resurgence in the hard time of imperial Anthropocene and Capitalocene. So that's our great enthusiastic challenge.
So I don't know if you even refer to the word actor anymore. You certainly work with performers, right? What would you say? What are the qualities? What are the qualities of a performer? What is the role of the performer now? What would you?
No, that was I know, I loved this with my. I stopped using these words in 2017, 18 with the previous projects, because I realized performance is already a strong it's really anti what I just said with research. So performing is very much to me like former paradigm, or acting. And it's really, when I was writing my dossiers, the first time I realized, oh, we need to look for another vocabulary, because if I say we are deeply listening and we are aiming to be very humbly, be in presence and listen before we decide to perform or act, then I need to find the proper words to describe that. And those words didn't come from the art world. They came a little bit from the music world, because they are much more experimental in that sense of discovering new words and new vocabulary to describe their work. But also in science, and mostly, for example, in gender studies, they have been much faster growing in inventing new codes, new words. And so now, of course, everyone is talking about, this collective intelligence, and about the ecosystem of our work. And so we are including a lot of vocabulary from permaculture, from gender studies, from sciences, so that we can eventually get rid of this very narrow idea of performance, actor, and really widen, so that in a way we free ourselves from having to do and having to really impose a style, or throw something there. And of course, in the end, I had plenty of discussions with lovers for embodiment and for acting. In the end, I think we meet in the same place. The process is very, very different. And when we meet in the same place, we meet with new kind of narratives. Of course, they are not human-centered centered. Of course, they are not narratives that are linear. Of course, they are much more complex and open to different readings. But that's what we all want, no? To tell stories that really open to new possible narratives, that make us a little bit escape the Hollywood collapse, and really start working on telling new stories that didn't happen yet.
Kamili, what do you make of that? And from your point of view, as a writer, you're writing for what kind of performance, or what kind of sensibility of interpretation? I mean, what would you make of that shift of terminology?
It's good. It's a good question. I was glad that Julie was speaking so specifically about what she was doing, because I wanted to be a little bit more, hopefully abstract, but practically abstract in that way. Because we're obviously talking about doing this. What does a actor or performer prepare for? And one of the things I got from even just being a part of devising groups and learning devising in some ways, because I was really struck when I got out of grad school and I went to this big playwriting school, whatever. And then Pig Iron, this devising group, had done this really kind of very, not at all abstract thing that I heard, that eventually I heard that they had pulled from a piece by Adrian Kennedy, this playwright who I was really fascinated with in grad school. But they did this really kind of very vertical, it was very scenic design, very kind of dreamlike, very kind of storytelling, kind of turned inward and outward a lot. And I thought to myself at that point, like, maybe devising is something that could be useful for me, because it crosses both paths of, I think I have some instincts as a writer, in the sense of, I think writers are too scared to sound pompous by calling themselves philosophers, but you're always thinking, you're always trying to work out, and you're always asking weird questions. I heard a science fiction writer talk about how he realized how he thinks. And he said he was on a road and he kept looking up, and every time he looked up, he saw a billboard. He just done it a few times, and after a while, he said, what if your life experience was like that, where you're just seeing advertisements all around? And he started to construct a story out of that. And it made me think, oh yeah, maybe that's what I'm doing, and I need to find a place for it. So, you're always trying to put things into a place. And as a Virgo, I'm very good at trying to categorize things. I hear somebody laughing about that. But but as an actor, I think it's important to do exercises maybe that allow you to be able to see things in that same way. I'm not saying it comes second nature even, but that was what I always found kind of lacking even in creation groups sometimes, is that we were being put into these positions of being actors, and so we performed, and we were supposed to be strong, so we got strong, and it was all this, oh my God, we're just being very literal about something that's supposed to affect people out there. You know, it's not about you trying to be strong so that other people will think you're strong. It's about somebody being able to recognize something that's so abstract that they go, oh my God, he's scared. And they relate to that. So if you're not doing that, then you're just doing what 1,000 other toy soldiers do when they tell you to act strong or act angry or act wrong. So, and I'm getting a little emotional about it because it's something that I really feel very strongly about. Like, I don't know what we're teaching people half the time when we talk about performance in terms of reaching people. And I'm talking about a popular audience where everybody understands what happened in the room. And if we're not doing that, I think we're playing a game around how much money we can get from people by teaching them things that I learned. And I could do that. I stopped teaching in university after I got back from LISPA because I felt like I would be doing something false, because I knew students had to get their A's. And it wasn't important whether they did good work or not. They needed an A in American society in order for them to progress on. There was no point in being a C- student in college. So that betrayal I felt to students who were just trying to be writers or trying to get something done, and I certainly wasn't going to try to teach them acting, made me step away from university in that way. And now I'm doing something in standardized patient. As far as how I make money, $22 an hour, I get to pay people, or pay me to pretend to be a patient and then give advice to medical students on how they could talk to me a little bit better, nicer, how they could use pausing in order for me to understand that they heard something I said as opposed to just speaking and getting their agenda done. So those little moments between us is the things I think inspire each other. So we all had a little laugh before everybody got in here, and we're just trying to inspire each other. That's all human beings do. That's all human beings can do. And that's probably the only trait we've learned to allow me to think about my dad and keep going even in the middle of a snowstorm and I'm about to die. It's just that my dad or my mom or somebody did something that inspired me to keep going. And yeah, I'll say that's inspiration is what an actor needs, but it's inspirational on steroids.
When we had our little pre-discussion, it was very interesting because we seemed to be really not finding in a very interesting way any point of convergence in what we thought, you know, the situation was with theater, what in performance. But one of the things that really kind of came out of our conversation was this idea of interbeing. And that's, I think that is where we ended up sort of, in a sense, resonating with each other. What you're talking about, Kamili, this interbeing of basically the theater of daily life, where doctors learn to communicate with patients, and Julie, what you're talking about, the interbeing of the human and the more than human. Is interbeing something that can be learned in a classroom? Is it something that we can do in a studio? I mean, how do we, what's the pedagogy of interbeing? I'll leave it to either one of you to chime in.
That was the funny thing about being at LISPA for the 3 years I was there, especially for that last second year where we were, we were kind of, we were conscripted into performing our final pieces and everything. It was so debilitating being in a black box theater. And I wish we had done almost a spiritual ritual of 15 minutes where we just meditate and imagine ourselves in different surroundings so that our imaginations would grow as a result. You know, Hackney was a beautiful, vibrant community right outside of our little black box theater. And it was always so depressing to step right outside. And Hackney reminds me of a neighborhood I live in now. It's a very black, kind of very mixed group of people. And there was fights sometimes at bars. And there was just stuff going on. And I'm thinking to myself, we're going in here to replicate what's happening outside of here. And I don't know I'm a Virgo and I'm a writer, so I kind of need my space to be quiet and think about things. But there's got to be a balance, right? I know from my experience as a kid, you immerse me in something. I learn much more than you telling me to pick it apart now that we're in a safe space for me to sit and think about it for a while. That's dead to me. I mean, I don't get inspired by that. So I think the ways in which we learn interbeing is to go through difficult situations. I'm dealing with moving out of my place, and my brother and I had some really complicated conversations, I'll dare say it, name calling too. And I'm still feeling very guilty about it, but it was important that I made myself clear. And it was important that I got beyond just the things we used to do when we were kids and try to communicate in a different way. And, you know, I feel very touched by it. At the same time, it always has consequences because now we can't play as easily anymore because now we're a little bit more shy of each other or just, you know, careful around saying the right thing. But I think you learn after a while that that's part of the play too. And I think interplay, really, whether you're doing it, and I love animals. I can't have animals in my life right now, but I love animals. And so anytime I get a chance to see a bird like sit up on my windowsill, a little red bird, and he's looking in, I say, what you want? You know, and that kind of animated kind of way of thinking about life just helps with the imagination too. I mean, you can get it look like somebody's gonna think you're crazy at some point, but as long as you can articulate it and charm people and say, oh, you know, you do the same thing if you were feeling lonely or whatever too. So I think that's the way to do it. I mean, I only have my way, but matter of fact, that was the reason why I made it tongue in cheek and gave you that whole bio and everything, because I don't think me coming from Brown, having studied with Paula Vogel, and again, I appreciate being people coming and hear me talk about it, but I don't know if that has as much to do with me as what I can do when I talk to people and when I communicate with people too. So it's an interesting kind of collision I always find with having to explain myself. Even my parents' background. My parents are children's book illustrators and writers, so that helped me a little bit understand that I was coming from a wealthy background, and it was my job to share that wealth, right? Not because they were wealthy in terms of having a lot of money. My mom always never made more than $20,000 her whole life, and I think it was something about just being able to appreciate that someone thought that you were smart enough or sharp enough to be able to, and daring enough to speak to kids' minds through children's books. And so the respect that they gave my mom and dad was always awesome. And because my mom and dad held it with the respect that it was deserved and gave it right back to people, I always felt like that was the way you got to deal with people. Even if you're having problems, you know, it's still a play. And I got to remind myself that too, because, you know, sometimes I get into that mode where I'm having arguments with people out in the street and I'm like, look, you know, you're supposed to be somebody who's above that. Now, what are you doing? You know, it's not that my emotions can't be above that, but I can't be behaving like a fool, you know. So I think a lot of that inner being has to do with just daring to push past things. I mean, the whole thing of storytelling is daring to put a hero in a situation where he'll never get out of it and then trying to get him out of it. So what are you doing trying to take some shortcuts in any other situation when that's the most endearing stories we can tell about each other, you know? So yeah, that's on me.
Wonderful. Judy, do you have any do you have any thoughts about how we can, what the pedagogy of interbeing?
Oh, I have a lot of thoughts about it. I have nothing ready to, finalize. But yeah, with this past research, I've been invited to share this research in different contexts, in art schools, sometimes with architects in design schools, and mostly in the context of festivals, inviting our work and then adding workshops or asking us to interact with the audiences. And I realized in art schools that in theater schools, in dance schools, it was the questions, of the director or the very kind person organizing this 2 month, very often I ask for like a long period, 2 month workshop with a group. Okay, great. So how big the room? I'm like, we are not gonna work indoors. And then, and so how many people maximum? And it's really not answering these questions anymore. It's so mostly I enjoy a lot developing these new ways of including many different disciplines into the work by inviting a lot of my collaborators to teach together with me to take us to a very different journey from a different discipline simultaneously, to work mostly outdoors so that we get really used to use our senses, and to sometimes come back indoors when it rains heavily, or when we have to concentrate on the inside listening inwardly. And that is a very interesting way to me. I realized going physically indoors and outdoors, inwardly, outwardly, and merging progressively. It is about this score by Pauline Oliveros, The Witness, these 3 strategies of focusing our listening to the inside, which is of course impossible. It's not about blocking the outside world. It doesn't work, it doesn't exist, it's an illusion. But how do you focus your attention on your inside world and then the world around you, and then eventually how do you merge these 2 abilities of listening in both ways? And I had no idea how to do that with this group of yeah, and it was very interesting to do it with a group of young actors who came, for example, in Berlin from around the world to play Commedia dell'arte. And they hated me so much. They hated me so much because they wanted skills, technique, they wanted to play theater. And suddenly I was placed there and telling them, psh, nah, listen, just, and they really told me in the end, it was so painful. They really hated that. And with these 70 women in Russia during the lockdown in Tsaritsino Park in Moscow, they were outside. I was here in Switzerland, Zooming with them. It was a completely other experience. And we had a pedagogical training, distant pedagogical training for 2 months every day with this group there, me here, and them in this huge forest. That was a whole different story. And again, I would say it works. It's like a fascinating, very, very new to me. Maybe it exists all around the world and I'm not aware of that. But to me, it was very fascinating to start from scratch, to, of course, know what we know. Our body has that structure, that everything we experienced and we keep experiencing in theater, in different techniques, but to not use that in the first place, to be surprised when it comes and when suddenly we need that, okay, let's take it. But to not assume that we need these tools now in this world, to know they are there, and to develop others. And we have no idea what we are doing. But until now, it was possible to structure the research. We worked a lot with the Srishti Institute as well in Bangalore about that, and with the National Theatre School there in Bangalore as well. And it was really great. We had 40 days to really go through a whole process. So it's very possible to structure this pedagogy, to go through a journey with it, to develop definitely not only our ability to tune in and this interbeingness, but also to leave it open to different ways of using it afterwards. Yes, if you want to go back and use that in Commedia dell'arte, is it possible? Is it possible to say that this is a 7th or 8th level of energy, to be so charged that you were talking about meditation, Kamili, that you are so charged that you are just even above this level of energy where you stop walking, you dance, you stop talking, you sing. What is after that? And maybe after that comes what we discovered, the deep listening, which is made through your entire body, of course. So I am developing that very much with great pleasure, with many different groups, schools, and public. And it, after this episode of the German students hating me, it never happened again. I found a way to really bring them a little bit more progressively towards that. And I give them a little theater in the beginning for the first few days. And then we switch to something else.
Very interesting. This is usually the time in the discussion where we start to just open it out, and people can just unmute themselves and ask questions, or you can put it in the chat. I'll try to curate the questions from the chat. Jehan, you have asked about Julie's. You mentioned the three strategies. Wanting some clarification about the three strategies.
Yeah, it's so Pauline. Can you raise your hand, the person asking this question? Ah, voilà.
Oh,
hello.
I'm Pauline. I'm not the. I didn't ask the question though.
Ah, no, you didn't ask the question. Who asked the question?
Jehan did. Jehan, but it's
Voilà. Hello.
Pauline Oliveros. That's why the word.
Yeah. So Pauline Oliveros, I don't know if you know her work. She basically, like many of today's composers, she wrote a lot of different kind of scores. They are not scores with little notes on them, but they are either drawings or text scores. One of these text scores, there are plenty of books, collections of her text scores that are, some of them are super playful for performers, some of them are for movers, some of them are for violin players. So it's very specific, and sometimes it's for everyone. That's the case of that score, The Witness. And that score is more sophisticated than many others because first it's longer, it's a long text, and it is made of different strategies. And basically what she explains in her text is a protocol to evolve through a series of experiments with our entire body, with different senses. And so she describes the strategy 1, which is a strategy, and the scores are perfect because, you know, can you imagine as a composer, when you write a text score, every word is a note. So it's very specific. So I don't like explaining her score without reading it because it's so specific. But basically strategy 1 is listening inwardly, listening to. Strategy 2 is different strategies to listen around us. And strategy 3 is starting to listen everywhere. And so that puts you through, I realized it's a minimum of 40 days to 60 days to me to go through the depth of that proposition. And each time I do it, I discover an infinity of new questions. But of course, Pauline really said, be as playful as you can with this. So some people really play, some musicians play with that as a warm-up in the morning, a 10 minutes warm-up. Voilà. And if you are interested after, I can send you the links to her books where all these text scores.
Yeah.
Someone just shared the link. Thank you.
Edith also for sharing the link. Yeah, great. Jehan, I mean, do you want to just unmute yourself and ask your next question?
So I run a drama school. I train actors to act and perform. And listening to this, I'm just like, whoa, okay. I think one of the things I resonated with Kamili was this idea that the active performance has to be able to reach everybody for every, you know, like it has to be you spoke about almost a totality of an experience. And if we're not doing that, then we should not be doing that. We should be thinking about something else. But and that's one. And then Julie, everything you spoke of in terms of where you're trying to take people in their experience of interbeing, for example. But I'm listening to both of you. You've both had training in theater. You've both had the experience of theater, and I'm just wondering. You know, we talk about find the tools. Maybe the tools aren't right for now, but when we train, our experience of the tools, I'm at one layer above the tools themselves. Our experience of the tools make us become who we are, who can then go on and do the multiple things. So I don't know. I mean, how do you feel about the fact that, like, so what I'm positing here is you can both do what you do right now because of the experiences you had, including conventional actor training, etc. It took you there. It's part of your history. It's part of who you are. But then should we look at what we're doing and see that we still use these tools, we still train them in these ways, but we're not just training them for the black box, we're training them for the black box and beyond, or we're training them for theater and beyond. But we still have to walk this walk through the theater, through the proscenium, through the black box, through everything.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm speaking very personally, I think, right now too, just about as far as what I felt like walking away from and trying to explain my career choices and everything in terms of what I end up gravitating to sometimes, what I end up pulling away from, what I end up going towards. The other part is professionally speaking, I always felt like when I was at LISPA, for instance, and when I was studying with playwrights, they're always pointing you in a direction that's beyond just the tools that you're learning right now. They're always saying, yeah, you can play. I mean, listen, we had every opportunity to learn how not to be just strong when you get up in front of somebody and do it. And then we just go back to our instincts around what we've seen, right? So I think it's a much more comprehensive thing around reverse engineering what we've been inspired by, right? Like, everybody in my LISP experience were smartest in their class, probably were pretty sharp, probably were told they were special. I don't know if those are the people that need to be in a place where their imagination needs to be kind of stoked and things like that. I shouldn't say that. I don't know if theater reaches the communities it always supposed to reach, right? And then what do? You get grants and you try to get funding for people who have never had a chance to do this. Maybe their relationships with art is very different, so they don't necessarily respond in the same way. There's a lot of ways in which we could kind of, talk about how professional training should be. I think it's really important to just remind ourselves that there's something out there that we really want to get to, right? And then that starts to slowly inform the practices that we teach, right? And again, I'm not coming from any particular writer, actor, pedagogy kind of pool or anything. I'm just suggesting that there's a way in which we probably should keep turning the mirror on ourselves. And, again, practically speaking, you can talk about just somebody putting yourself into the role and actually performing the role of a nurse. Now, some people are made to be nurses, and some people should never have put on an outfit and pretended like they're actually here to care for another human being, right? That is all interesting from a storytelling point of view. And it's something that's accomplishable for an actor when you say, this is the last person who should be a nurse. And yet they are a nurse. They've had 30 years of practice as a nurse. Who are you? And then, you start pulling on your own personality, right? What kind of person am I when I'm performing a role that I know I'm not good at, but I've been able to do this for a long time? What kind of personality is that? What kind of character is that? Should that be the subject of your story? So you can build up from and again, another realm of this, or another deeper layer of this, is just going into the performer's psychology, right? What is their stature in the world? Is it very obvious in terms of their physicality, in terms of their physiology even? Like, is it very obvious that they're having a contentious battle with their stature in the world, as we all are, right, on some level or another? But that all of a sudden tells story. That all of a sudden starts to let us know something about you as a person. Now, how do you access that and make that work in theater? Those are things that I think, are still pointing to that other direction of, look, this is what an audience wants to see out of you. They don't care about all that other stuff and you pretending like a prince or doing whatever you're doing a lispetry or whatever. Really what they want to see is something else going on. So speaking personally for me, I think at this point, whether it's called pedagogical or not, or whether somebody pays me for it or not, I just want to get together with people who I think are of the same mindset, even if we all have different strengths and limitations and everything, and try to make something work out of that. I can't speak about what an industry or what things that are part of a professional package are, but I mean, that's the only thing I can point to, is just point in that direction of, that's the people those are the people. And again, you're not going to be able to get everybody's attention, but why not look for everybody's attention? Because you've done something when you reach. There's a reason why certain people are stars. They've either been pushed up as stars or they have real skill sets. And those skill sets should be studied and understood as tools. And they may have them naturally, they may have developed them, but it's really interesting to do a deep dive on some things that really touch people out there and understand why, as opposed to just assuming that somebody who's doesn't know how to read or write, or somebody who doesn't have an academic education doesn't know what they like. That's all I mean. It's just that, like, we can talk about this in a more holistic way, and maybe even put into practice certain things as well. Hope that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Would anybody like to just
I wanna just respond. If
hi Tushar.
Hi, hi Julie.
Hello, Tusha.
Personally, I am an actor, director, and I'm also an advisor to drama school, the school Jahan runs.
He's my boss.
I just want to respond to one thing that Julie was speaking about in terms of interbeing, and also the sense of finding why she works with musicians and scientists and not directly would call performers. But my understanding would be that when you talk of heightened sense of listening and heightened sense of true response, and not trying to be a performer and not trying to react to what the skill set you've been taught, isn't that the basis of any, if I won't use the word performer, of any being trying to respond to anything? Because at the end of the day, when if I have two thoughts to that. One is, when we're running all the aspects of any drama school would be to for the student or for the participant to find a voice and to find a response to whatever provocation they've been put in, right? That could be in regards to a situation for a character, or regards to an exercise where I myself am trying to react to, be it for voice, or be it for movement, or be it for anything else. Now, my thing is, one is being taught to respond how they see to it, and not always trying to be a performer to something. I mean, I'm trying to say, you're not always trying to have a skill set to respond to. When you're talking of comedy dell'arte, it's a specific style. We've been told to work in a certain fashion. But otherwise, most of the places where one is trying to be a performer, if I won't use the word performer, the idea is that you have to have a heightened sense of listening and a sense of how you would truly respond with your body, and with the understanding of how your limbs and how your brain functions. So I'm kind of finding, are we trying to unnecessarily divert and create a new track, which inherently is the center of anyone trying to be to any response? The second thing I want to respond to it, when I'm looking at a lot of Indian styles of performance. I mean, it's a loose term, but they always are trying to find a balance between how a being respond, at the same time also hold on to a very specific style set they've been told. If you look at Kathakali or Kudiyattam or any other style, you've been told a language like Comedy dell'arte or any other form, but inherently there is also a way where you can channelize yourself and find a voice which belongs to you. So I'm kind of sensing that what you're saying is inherently very much what a performer should be. That's all.
Thank you for this comment and question in a way. I had a wonderful teacher one day, Norman Taylor, and he actually was making fun of me quite a lot, as he knows, with a lot of care and love, because I came from dance, and I was not able to enter a room without putting my feet as a dancer, I was shaped in a way by my technique, and the whole purpose of the first month in Lecoq School was, when I was there, I don't know now, but when I was there, was really to kind of, in a way, liberate you from all these techniques, so that you are fully available for everything else to come in. And then this great teacher told me 20 years later a beautiful other thing. He said, sometimes in order to grow up, you have to betray. And I come from the mountain, and I see these amazing mountains very often in front of me. And I really see how important it is that the mountain is so strong, so big, so well built, like a beautiful pedagogy, like a theater school, that it is so wonderfully powerful in front of me that it needs to trigger in me the will to go beyond that. And so, yes, we talked about how can we get these beautiful different techniques and become a performer, an actor that develops this sense of listening. But we know also, and that develops enough tools to want to go beyond the school and beyond these techniques and invent others. But also, I really realized the more I work with this new world, and I'm really discovering this new work now, with different techniques and this transdisciplinarity and this new kind of opera based on this deep listening, I realized that it's much more difficult to work with actor and performers because they are like the dancer entering the room. They are really, but they are also flexible because they know, they understand a new style, a new research very easily. So that's their flexibility and their strength. But they have a lot of techniques and goals that are making their process through this kind of work very slow and much more complicated than non-trained people, which is fine. It's fascinating, it's great, but it's not easy for them to go there. And I realize it's much more easy for a non-trained person as an actor to develop that. I have zero theory about it. I just could observe that very much. The frustration of the actor who wants, at one point, he's okay with listening, but then he wants to do, he wants to propose, he wants to, and this frustration is beautiful to watch.
But that's kind of a question saying that's what the education system does to you. It kind of limits you to the way you think about it.
Et voilà, actor. So the feeling of not being able to do as an actor is translated by it limits you. And with non-actors, it's translated by, wow, so I can listen even more, even deeper, even longer. And the actor will eventually meet the mountain and say, I need to act, I need to do something about it, which stops the experience of listening.
Elizabeth, you've had your hand raised for a while. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Hi. Thank you very much, Julie and Kamili. I just have so many things going in my mind right now, but I'll try to focus. I did a play called The Listeners, and I send the students outside to the street to listen to people, not just to what they say, but how they speak, the energy they use, and the words that they that they repeat. And then we create a performance out of improvisations, because our objective was to say what nobody wants to listen, even though we are talking to each other. So the performance went spreading into nature, listening to nature at different times of the day, in the morning, the midday, then at night. And then we developed a beautiful piece of, that went into slavery to our times in nature, in this island of Jamaica. So we learned a lot from that experience of listening, a lot, so much that we couldn't put into words everything that we learned. And this is what I am sensing from Kamili and Julie in some way. Perhaps I need to know more about your work. But then my question is, in these times, online teaching, I teach voice and speech online. I like the challenge. I really like it. And I learned something from a webinar that I did at the beginning of this year that says that we have to find a new way to enter where we are, and a new way to live. And also that the most important thing online teaching is the feedback of the students. So my question is for Julie. I think that when you are having all these people listening to each other or listening outside, then how do you direct the feedback among them? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a whole process that includes it's such demanding experience to go through, and as you know, to listen. It's really physically, emotionally, spiritually quite demanding, and it's a long process. And I would not do it more than 5 minutes a day. So until we reach the maybe after 40, 60 days, maybe an hour. And so the rest is a lot of preparation. It's a lot of how, as you describe, a lot of experiments, a lot of games. Sometimes I bring back exercises that we did in theater schools just to prepare the listening. Sometimes I use other techniques, and I go progressively towards that moment when we can really listen for, it's like meditation. The mind is speaking quite loudly. So it takes time to quiet the mind, to open all these other ways to listen. It takes a long time. So the process is really very collective, and people are sharing and giving feedbacks to each other across the whole process through the long days of getting there in order to attune to the world better and better each day. And I must say, once we reach the moment when we all are able to quiet our mind, listen fully, and do something about it, maybe shape it, maybe use it for a precise purpose, then it's a deep shared experience. And I keep exactly a year ago, we did that in Bangalore for 2 months. And I keep receiving feedbacks almost every week now by the participants. It's a long feedback process. It takes months. It's really an experience that inhabits people's practice and life for a long time. The groups are really tied together after such experiments because they shared an intense process, and we together, I with them, understand and give feedbacks to each other for a long period of time after that. Don't know if that answers your question.
Can I I feel like I need to offer a little bit more practical things too, since Julie's been so wonderful with some of the things she's talking about. What I've done over the last 10 years is I've been trying to collect a scrapbook of my pleasures, pleasures I had when I was a kid, secret pleasures, and I've just been talking to people about them, right? Like, so I watch a film that I've loved and I try to nip it down to what I've really enjoyed about something and then be able to articulate to somebody in as exciting way as possible so that I generate the same feeling that I had for it as a kid, and I can still articulate it as an adult in some ways too. I wonder if that would help a performer in terms of not necessarily being able to practically use any of those pleasures, but just be more aware of themselves if they're not into going to a therapist and talking about deep stuff or talking about stuff that's dramatic. It's just being much more aware of what you actually care about and what stimulates your imagination, because that's what we need, right? We need totems around us. We need things that always are kind of like, whether it's jewelry, whether it's anything else, whether it's perfume, we need to be stimulated in some way. I don't do perfume, I don't do much jewelry, but those are the things I carry around with me. And again, it's just keeping us aware of our audience stature so that we can then be much more serviceable in the performance stature, right? Because if we're still very humble in the sense of, oh, that always touched me, you won't think of yourself as being naive or gullible when you perform in a certain way that's a lot more open and vulnerable than you expected, because you're having that access to a certain pleasure you had. I mean, this is stuff you always learned in acting school too, but I'm just talking about it, making it a personal journey for yourself, even along with whatever practices you're doing. That's just something I thought might be able to help as I get a little worried about being too abstract.
Great. We have a number of in the chat. With Salone, you said something, and Vidur, and Yashwant, you seem to be also raising your hand.
Yashwant's hand's been up for a while.
Yeah, Yashwant, you wanna unmute yourself and say something, to speak out something?
Shall I just ask shall I do that?
Sure.
Can you hear me? Okay, Kamili, and Julie, thank you very much. I mean, this is really something which has begun to excite me at the moment. Um, uh, with my, you're really talking in terms of desensitization of the human being, isn't it? I mean, we become desensitized almost totally to something like the other day. I just saw a child actually lift a lipstick. We were talking about lipstick, and it went straight to the lips. Yeah. Um, if by chance we were able to break the structure of language and the tyranny of words that are there, the tyranny that it imposes on an actor, that okay, we are going down this structure, we are going down this total structure because of the language that is imposed on the actor itself. And are you talking in terms of developing an entirely different way of communication with the audience? It happened when language didn't make much sense at the time where the absurdists came along onto the line, when experiences were happening to human beings, which they weren't able to communicate through structured language, right? And now are you really saying that there is an audience that is ready for such fundamental communication, such different type of preparation of a performance, if you want to call it like that, a preparation, an actor, a vaster dimension of the actor? Are you saying that we are ready for that?
In my experiences, I discovered that, as we were talking before, there is no more actor or performer, there is no more audience. And everyone participates. I mean, if you want it or not, you participate anyway. So this illusion that there is an actor and a passive member in the dark observing, it doesn't exist. This binary conception, I realized, was really exploding with these explorations that we made. So no more performer, no more actors, all listeners, participants, experimenters, and many people sign in to be part of the experience, not as audience, but part of the experience. And personally, ça m'arrange. It's quite convenient for me, because I was feeling it felt a little bit like this code that I didn't really believe in anyway, to be directing something in the light, and then there's this other part in the dark watching. It felt, wow, there are many other dynamics and exchanges between us that I'm very interested in. I don't believe in passive active. I do think that it's more complex than that we are not anymore in this binary relationship. And the world is really breaking. We are in a post-binary dynamic now. So if we embrace it completely, as researchers, artists, scientists, actors, performers, we should also experiment and see how we can bring such a complexity, such a almost, these interdependencies and interactions in the whole space between all the beings in presence. And if we decide to cut ourselves and just stay with human beings, then even more. Okay, there is only human beings here, not anything else, no animals, no plants, no other sentient beings. So what can we experiment together so that we don't call it actor and audience anymore? And audiences are super ready to be more experimenters than audiences. I realized in most festivals, it was sold out immediately. People really are engaging in it.
And let me speak to the performer audience thing. For me, just coming into theater, from just growing up in a regular, fairly new, what they call Black American neighborhood. It was a neighborhood that was white, and then as soon as Black people started moving in, slowly white people started to leave. So it was a community that was still intact. It had like butcher shops and all the things you needed. But it was a community that was in conflict with one another. So there was a lot of performances every day, and you were sometimes part of it. There was no division between somebody being too young to participate in some weirdness and adult being too old to be participating in stuff. So a lot of things happened. I'll just say that, just to, for lack of a better word, to lack of a better term, that allowed me to realize that I'm always a part of something. And then, you know, going to sporting things. And Philadelphia is very big on their sport teams. So just going to a team that I really enjoyed watching and watching a player I perform, we're all in this when this guy manages to get a shot in. And at that point, you're not thinking about anything but that it's a party. And I think what Julie's talking about is reverse engineering that now in terms of doing something natural. But that was my experience even going to a church where the preacher was such a nasty person. But the experience of everybody screaming and speaking in tongues and standing up and giving their own testimony about their personal life. These were very poor people sometimes too in these storefront church that I went to. That was really, it was just stuff I was taking in. And I didn't connect it with theater. I didn't connect it with opera or musical theater. I just knew that it was something I wanted to be able to share with people at some point, that may be possible through the arts. In some ways, I'll say theater. But I got to be honest, I thought theater was going to do something different. I thought theater, what I saw from Pig Iron and all these devising groups and all these people who had really great scenic imaginations, I thought that theater was going to become like the way cinema is, in terms of cinema recognized that it had to become, everything had to be the same way as what you would think you experience when you're out in the street. I thought theater was going to be every day, in the sense of like a haunted house in the street. And sometimes you were going to be fooled into walking through an area and you realize, oh, that's where they perform. And so sometimes you're thinking one thing and not another. So I was very surprised that theater went in the directions that it went, not because the kid can't still be that, but I thought it would be much more integrated into, oh, you trickster, I thought this was real. Somebody just starts crying because they just lost some money and they do it right out in front of the street in front of you. I thought that was going to be a part of theater, and you know, may still be, but that's the idea I had about where theater was going, because I thought it really just, it got into your head that way better.
We have time for probably just one more comment. Vidur, are you still there? Did you want to unmute yourself and speak your comment from the chat?
Yeah. Hi. First of all, thank you for giving this lecture. I think it's quite interesting to know about interbeing. So I'm also a student at Drama School Mumbai, and so I mean, I've already written the comments. It just says that I think knowing more about the norms of a technique is never a loss, because you keep on grabbing things from the past, but it is often exciting to extend practices in directions which are still invisible to us in the future, and then prodding into it rather than always relying on the past. Because I think futures are less looked at when it comes to referencing. We look at the future and we think about questions that we don't have assured responses for. So it has more potency for deviation from those norms of techniques. And then how do you then deviate? So it was just extending from what Jehan and Tushar just said. So for me personally, it becomes very exciting, just processing this deviance. I was having a chat with one of our faculty members who does Feldenkrais, and I asked him that, why is it that every time in body movement we are talking about ease? We have to emerge from ease to conflict. What happens if I want to go the other way around? And he said that, yes, but you should also know that what happens with the norm then. So it's something that always I personally struggle with, but it's very exciting to just look at techniques that are not there in the past.
Yeah, sounds right to me.
You're muted.
Julie, you're muted.
Yeah, sorry, I was talking to myself. No, it's really, I do believe that non-binary also affects the past and the future. We really need both to be in communication, and we need to embody both. All techniques are very important to embody. Then some of them are just difficult to embody simultaneously, but that's that's our training, to go towards this excellence of simultaneous embodiment. No, c'est génial.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Henri Lefebvre. He has two words: strategies, spatial strategies, and spatial tactics. And the strategy is hegemonizing and creates a space that imposes a frame on everything, whereas the tactic is an improvisational tool. So when you speak about different techniques, I imagine that they could be simply tactics. They're things to be played with. Whereas the spatial strategy would be to say, no, I mean, we must frame this in such a way that it reproduces something very dependable. So I think there could be a sort of, as you say, I mean, the non-binary is very playful. I mean, it hopefully doesn't become a hegemony in itself.
The future is fluid, Amy.
Well, the future is upon us, and that is the end of our wonderful discussion. Thank you so very, very much, everybody, for being here this evening, and really would love to invite all of you to come next Thursday. I'll host another writer and another director also on the very cutting edge, both of them located in the U.S., reacting very strongly to the upheaval in the United States right now. Eric Ting, who's artistic director at Cal Shakes, and Kelly Garrett, who describes herself as African playwright, both of them reacting to changing scenes in the United States. So it would be a great pleasure and privilege to have you join us next week as well. Thank you so much to Drama School Mumbai and the team behind this wonderful event. And thank you so much all for my friends, Kamili and Julie.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Jehan. Thank you, Raghu.
Thank you.
Les. Thank you.